This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
The house on Blackthorn Hill. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, demons, and otherworldly entities were simply fodder for late-night campfire tales. But that was before I moved to Blackthorn Hill. It all began with a need for solitude. After the accident, the doctors suggested that I find a quiet place to recover, somewhere far from the incessant noise and prying eyes of the city. Blackthorn Hill seemed perfect. A small, unassuming town with a rich history and plenty of peace and quiet. I rented an old Victorian house on the outskirts, its weathered facade a testament to years of neglect. It was the kind of place that oozed charm, even if it was a little worse for wear. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, ate a simple dinner and read until my eyelids grew heavy. It wasn't until the second night that things began to change. I awoke to a strange noise, a soft thumping coming from somewhere deep within the house. It was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I dismissed it as the house settling, an excuse that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, but as the nights wore on, the noises grew louder and more distinct. Sometimes it was a creaking floorboard, other times it was a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold draft sweep through the room. The windows were shut tight, and yet there it was, a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I sat up, straining to hear anything out of the ordinary. The thumping had returned, louder this time, echoing through the halls. With a growing sense of unease, I grabbed a flashlight and ventured out of my room. The house was eerily silent except for the steady thump, thump, thump. I followed the sound down the long corridor, my footsteps echoing off the hardwood floors. The noise seemed to be coming from the basement, a place I had yet to explore. The door to the basement was old and heavy, its hinges groaning in protest as I pushed it open. A narrow staircase led down into the darkness. I hesitated, the beam of my flashlight revealing only the first few steps. Taking a deep breath, I descended, the thumping growing louder with each step. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a large, musty room. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mold hung in the air. The flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing old furniture covered in white sheets, stacks of forgotten boxes, and cobwebs hanging like tattered curtains. The noise was coming from a corner of the room, where an old wooden trunk sat. It was large and ornate, covered in strange carvings that seemed to shift in the light. The thumping was now a steady pounding, as if something inside the trunk was desperate to get out. I approached it cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. With trembling hands, I reached for the latch, hesitating for just a moment before flipping it open. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing the contents inside. To my surprise, the trunk was empty. There was nothing inside but darkness. I shone the flashlight into the depths, half expecting something to leap out at me, but there was nothing. The pounding had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Confused and more than a little shaken, I closed the trunk and retreated back upstairs. The rest of the night was sleepless, every creak and groan of the house amplified by my heightened senses. The next morning, I decided to explore the town, hoping to find some distraction from the previous night's events. I wandered into the local library, a quaint little building filled with the musty scent of old books. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, greeted me warmly. We struck up a conversation, and I found myself asking about the history of Blackthorn Hill, and more specifically the house I was renting. Her expression grew serious, and she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That house has a dark history," she said. "It belonged to the Blackthorn family, one of the oldest families in the area. They were a reclusive bunch, known for their strange rituals and practices. People say the house is haunted by the spirits of those who died there, trapped between worlds." I listened, a chill running down my spine as she recounted tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena. The stories mirrored my own experiences, and I felt a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. That night, the noises returned with a vengeance. The thumping was now accompanied by whispers, unintelligible but unmistakably real. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging the air. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I knew I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed my bags hastily, the sense of urgency driving me to leave as quickly as possible. As I made my way to the front door, I heard a final, deafening thump, followed by a blood-curdling scream. It echoed through the house, chilling me to the bone. I fled Blackthorn Hill that night, vowing never to return. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house. All I know is that some things are better left undisturbed, their mysteries unsolved. The supernatural may be beyond our understanding, but its presence is undeniable, a dark shadow that lingers just out of sight, waiting for the unwary to stumble upon it. In the years since, I've come to accept that there are forces in this world we cannot comprehend. The house on Blackthorn Hill stands as a reminder of the unknown, a place where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blur, and the fear of the unknown takes on a life of its own.
The infiltration. I woke up to the sound of my own screams. The nightmares had been getting worse, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. My body felt alien, as if it didn't belong to me anymore. I tried to push the thought away, blaming it on stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew the truth was far more sinister. It started a month ago when I found that strange mark on my neck. A small, almost imperceptible puncture wound, like a mosquito bite but slightly bigger. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was nothing. But then I began to notice changes. Subtle at first. My reflection seemed different and my eyes looked wrong, as if something else was staring back at me. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. My skin became paler, my senses sharper. I could hear conversations happening rooms away, smell the faintest of scents. But it wasn't just physical. There was a presence in my mind, a constant whispering that grew louder each day. It told me things, dark things, urging me to do unspeakable acts. I tried to fight it, but the voice was relentless. It wanted control, and I could feel myself slipping away. The more I resisted, the more painful it became. My thoughts were no longer my own, invaded by something ancient and malevolent. I was losing myself to this entity, this parasite that had burrowed into my very soul. One night, as I lay in bed, the whispering became a deafening roar. My body convulsed, muscles seizing in agonizing spasms. I felt something moving beneath my skin, crawling through my veins. I wanted to scream, but my voice was not my own anymore. I watched in horror as my hand reached up and touched my face, the fingers curling unnaturally. "Let go," the voice commanded. "Embrace the change." I was terrified, but there was nothing I could do. I was a prisoner in my own body, my consciousness trapped in a dark corner of my mind. I could feel the entity taking over, merging with me. My thoughts became fragmented. A chaotic blend of my own memories and the alien presence's ancient ones. Days turned into weeks, and I learned to coexist with the invader. I had no choice. It was stronger than me, and resistance was futile. I became a puppet, my actions controlled by the entity. It fed off my fear, my anguish, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't long before I realized I wasn't alone. There were others like me, hosts to these parasitic beings. We would gather in the dead of night, our eyes glowing with an unnatural light, our voices a chorus of the ancient whisper. We were the infiltrated, our humanity stripped away, replaced by the darkness that consumed us. I remember the first time I saw the leader of the infiltrated. He stood tall, his eyes burning with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. His voice was a command, a summons that we could not ignore. "Welcome, new host," he said, his gaze piercing through me. "You are now part of something greater, something eternal. Embrace your new existence." I wanted to scream, to run away, but my body betrayed me. I could only watch as the leader approached, his hand reaching out to touch my forehead. The moment he made contact, I felt a surge of power, a connection to the hive mind of the infiltrated. I could hear their thoughts, their desires. We were one, a collective consciousness bound by the entity that controlled us. Over time, I learned to accept my fate. The pain of resistance faded, replaced by a numb acceptance. I became a vessel, my body a tool for the entity to use as it saw fit. My former life was a distant memory, my human emotions dulled by the presence that now inhabited me. But there were moments, fleeting and rare, when I could feel a spark of my old self. a brief flash of humanity that reminded me of who I once was. I clung to those moments, hoping that one day I might find a way to reclaim my body, to expel the invader that had taken everything from me. It was during one of these moments that I discovered a weakness in the entity's control, a vulnerability that I could exploit. I began to plot, to plan my escape. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was my only hope. The night of the escape, I gathered all my strength, focusing on that spark of humanity within me. I fought against the entity's control, pushing back with every ounce of willpower I had left. The pain was excruciating, but I pressed on, determined to break free. And then, in a blinding flash, I felt the connection sever. The presence in my mind retreated, its grip on my body loosening. I was free, but only for a moment. I knew the entity would return stronger and angrier than before. I had to act quickly. I fled, running through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get as far away as possible. The infiltrated would come for me, but I couldn't let them catch me. I had to find a way to destroy the entity once and for all. As I ran, I could feel the presence stirring within me, its anger palpable. It was only a matter of time before it regained control, but I would not go down without a fight. I would find a way to end this nightmare, to reclaim my body and my mind, and so the battle continues. I am a fugitive, hunted by the very thing that once controlled me. But I am also a survivor, determined to fight back against the darkness that seeks to consume me. The infiltration may have begun, but it will not end with me. The Cursed Ledger.
The year was 1692, and I, Abigail Hartwell, was a simple apothecary's daughter in the village of Salem. The Puritan town, with its rigid piety and unyielding beliefs, was a treacherous place for those who strayed from the narrow path of righteousness. My mother, Sarah Hartwell, had taught me the secrets of herbs and potions, knowledge passed down through generations. But in a town gripped by fear of the devil, such wisdom was perilous. It was late autumn when the hysteria began. Whispers of witchcraft spread like wildfire, igniting the townsfolk's deepest fears. Innocent women and men were accused, their lives ruined by the mere suggestion of consorting with dark forces. The trials were merciless, the gallows busy. Every glance, every whispered word, every look of suspicion carried the weight of potential doom. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally, a stranger arrived at our door. His name was Jonathan Hale, a wealthy merchant from Boston. His demeanor was polite, yet his eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. "I've come to seek your mother's expertise," he said, his voice smooth but urgent. "I've heard she is skilled in the healing arts." My mother, wary but compassionate, invited him in. As we sat by the fire, he produced a leather-bound ledger from his satchel. It was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age. "This book," he began, "has been in my family for generations. It is said to contain recipes and charms, some of which are believed to hold great power." My mother's eyes widened as she gently took the ledger. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. She paused at a page adorned with strange symbols and archaic script. "This is dangerous knowledge," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Such things are best left forgotten." But Jonathan Hale was insistent. "My wife is gravely ill," he pleaded. "The physicians can do nothing. If there is even a chance that this book can help her, I must try." Reluctantly, my mother agreed to study the ledger. She spent days poring over its contents, her brow furrowed in concentration. I assisted her as best I could, but there was an uneasy tension in the air, a sense that we were delving into something far beyond our understanding. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft rustling from the next room. I crept to the door and peeked through the crack. My mother was chanting softly, her fingers tracing the symbols on the page. The air around her seemed to shimmer, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The next morning, she handed Jonathan Hale a small vial of dark liquid. "Give her this," she instructed. 3 drops in water, twice a day." He thanked her profusely and left, but the unease lingered. Days turned into weeks, and the fear in Salem grew. More were accused, more were hanged. The town was gripped by paranoia, and the slightest deviation from the norm was met with suspicion. One evening, as we prepared for bed, there was a loud knock at the door. The constable and his men barged in, their faces grim. "Sarah Hartwell," the constable declared, "you are under arrest for the practice of witchcraft." I screamed and clung to my mother, but she was dragged away, her protests drowned out by the accusations of the crowd. I was left alone, terrified and helpless. The trial was swift and brutal. Jonathan Hale's wife had died, and he claimed that the potion my mother gave him was poison. The ledger was presented as evidence, its pages now a testament to her supposed pact with the devil. The townsfolk, eager to see another witch brought to justice, did not hesitate to condemn her. I watched in horror as my mother was led to the gallows. She maintained her innocence, but her words fell on deaf ears. As the noose was placed around her neck, she met my eyes, and I saw a mixture of fear and defiance. Then, with a final prayer on her lips, she was hanged. I was taken in by a kind neighbor, but the weight of my mother's death crushed my spirit. I spent my days in a daze, my nights plagued by nightmares. The ledger, now locked away by the authorities, haunted my thoughts. Months passed and the hysteria began to fade. The town, weary from the constant fear and death, slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. But for me, there was no solace. My mother's memory was tainted by the accusations, and I was shunned by many. One stormy night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, I felt a strange compulsion. I found myself drawn to the constable's house, where the ledger was kept. I slipped inside, the shadows concealing my presence. In his study, I found the ledger, its cover now coated with dust. As I opened it, a gust of wind extinguished the candle. In the darkness, the symbols on the pages seemed to glow faintly. My heart raced as I realized the true nature of the book. It was not merely a collection of recipes and charms, it was a conduit for ancient forbidden power. A voice, soft and familiar, echoed in my mind. It was my mother's voice, guiding me, urging me to understand. I knew then that her death was not in vain. The ledger held secrets that could change the world, but only if wielded with wisdom and care. With trembling hands, I closed the book and vowed to protect its knowledge. The fear of witchcraft had taken my mother from me, but it had also given me a purpose. I would honor her memory by mastering the arts she had begun to explore, and I would use that power to ensure that no one else would suffer as she had. The cursed ledger, a legacy of pain and potential, was now mine to bear. And with it, I would forge a new path, one that would defy the ignorance and fear that had claimed so many lives.
The sable mark. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls of my grandmother's ancient house, the kind of shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. This was where I found it, the book that would change everything. Bound in cracked black leather, its pages were filled with dense, spidery handwriting. My grandmother called it the sable mark. I had always been drawn to the strange and the unknown, a trait inherited from my grandmother, they said. Her stories, told in hushed tones by the fire, had always fascinated me. Tales of women accused of witchcraft, of trials that ended in hangings, of marks that appeared on the skin of those cursed by dark forces. These were not just stories, but warnings, she had said, remnants of our bloodline's haunted past. It was a chilly autumn evening when I first opened the book. My fingers trembled as I turned the fragile pages. The stories within were different from the ones my grandmother had told, darker, more sinister. They detailed rituals and spells, hexes and curses. I read late into the night, the candle burning low, until one story, in particular, caught my eye. It was the tale of a woman named Eliza Goodwin, accused of witchcraft in 1692. Unlike the other stories, this one seemed incomplete, ending abruptly with the words, "The mark shall reveal the truth." A chill ran down my spine as I read those words. The next page was blank, save for a peculiar symbol at the bottom, a black swirling mark that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I closed the book and went to bed, but sleep eluded me. My mind was filled with images of Eliza, standing trial, her eyes burning with defiance as the townspeople condemned her. I felt an inexplicable connection to her, a pull that I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper into her story. The local archives were a treasure trove of information. I found records of Eliza's trial, accounts of her life, and, most disturbingly, her death. She had been hanged on a cold winter's day. her body buried in an unmarked grave. The townspeople had claimed to see a black mark appear on her skin moments before she died, a sure sign of her guilt, they said. As I delved deeper, I began to notice strange occurrences around me. Objects would move on their own, whispers echoed in the dead of night, and that same swirling mark from the book appeared on my skin, just above my heart. Panic set in. I tried to scrub it off, but it remained dark and foreboding. Desperate for answers, I returned to the book. I traced my fingers over the mark on the page, hoping for some revelation. That night, I dreamt of Eliza. She stood before me, her eyes filled with sorrow. She spoke in a voice that was both distant and clear. The mark reveals the truth, but beware, for the truth is a double-edged sword. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The mark on my skin burned, and I knew I had to find Eliza's grave. I felt an unshakable compulsion to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Armed with a spade and a determination born of fear and curiosity, I ventured into the woods where Eliza was said to be buried. The forest was silent, save for the rustle of leaves underfoot. I found the spot described in the old records, an unassuming patch of earth beneath an ancient oak. I dug with fervour, each thrust of the spade into the ground feeling like a step closer to the truth. Hours passed, and then I hit something solid. My heart raced as I uncovered a wooden box, its surface etched with the same swirling mark. Inside I found bones, Eliza's bones. But there was something else, a small leather pouch. Inside the pouch was a piece of parchment, yellowed with age. It bore a single line of text: "The truth lies within the mark." As I stood there holding the parchment, the mark on my skin began to throb painfully. The air around me grew thick, and a cold wind blew through the trees. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see Eliza, her form translucent and shimmering. "The mark binds us," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "It is both a curse and a gift." I didn't understand, but before I could ask, she vanished, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The mark on my skin no longer burned, but a sense of unease settled over me. I knew I had to uncover the truth about the mark and its connection to my family. Over the following weeks, I scoured the book and other historical records, piecing together Eliza's life and her connection to my grandmother's stories. I discovered that the mark was a symbol of a lineage cursed by a powerful sorcerer, a mark that revealed those with the potential for great power and great danger. I realized that Eliza had tried to harness this power to protect herself, but it had led to her downfall. The townspeople, fearing what they couldn't understand, had condemned her. The mark was a sign of her strength, not her guilt. With this revelation, I knew I had to make a choice: to accept the mark and the power it represented, or to find a way to remove it. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but I felt a strange sense of purpose. The mark had revealed the truth, and now it was up to me to decide how to use it. In the end, I chose to embrace the mark, to learn from Eliza's mistakes and use the power for good. The road would be difficult, and the risks great, but I felt a kinship with Eliza, a shared destiny that I could not ignore. The mark had bound us together across time, and I vowed to honour her memory by forging a new path, one where the truth could be a beacon, not a curse.
The Hidden Hand. It was late when I received the call, the kind of late where your body is exhausted but your mind is too restless to sleep. The voice on the other end was hushed, almost fearful. It was Henry, my college friend, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. He mumbled something about needing help, about uncovering something he wasn't supposed to. Before I could ask for details, the line went dead. Henry was always the conspiracy theorist, the one who believed that secret societies were pulling the strings behind every major event. I'd humour him during our university days, chalking it up to his overactive imagination. But this call, there was something in his voice that night that gnawed at my gut, compelling me to find him. The next day I made my way to the small town where Henry had been living. It was a quiet place, almost too quiet. The streets were empty, and the few people I did see hurried by with their heads down. The air was thick with an unspoken tension. I reached Henry's house, a rundown Victorian on the outskirts, and knocked. No answer. I tried the door, and to my surprise, it swung open. Inside, the place was a wreck. Papers were strewn across the floor, books pulled from their shelves. It looked like someone had been searching for something, and they didn't care how much mess they made in the process. I called out for Henry, but there was only silence. In his study, I found a wall covered in newspaper clippings, photographs, and notes connected by red string, a classic conspiracy theorist's setup. The articles ranged from small-town events to global incidents, all somehow linked in Henry's mind, but what caught my eye was a single word scrawled repeatedly in bold letters: the hidden hand. As I stood there trying to make sense of Henry's chaotic research, I heard a noise from the basement. It was a faint rustling, almost imperceptible. My instincts told me to leave, but my concern for Henry pushed me forward. I descended the creaky wooden stairs, each step echoing in the confined space. The basement was dark, save for a small, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the far corner, huddled among boxes, was Henry. His eyes were wild, darting around as if expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. He looked gaunt, like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. When he saw me, his expression flickered between relief and terror. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "They'll know." "Who, Henry? What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "The hidden hand," he replied, his voice trembling. "They control everything. Governments, corporations, media. They've been operating in the shadows for centuries. I found something I wasn't supposed to." He handed me a folder filled with documents, some of them marked top secret. The contents were baffling. Correspondences between high-ranking officials, minutes from secret meetings, and detailed plans for manipulating world events. It was the kind of evidence that could bring down empires. "How did you get these?" I asked, stunned. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that they know I have them, and now that you're here, you're in danger too." I didn't have time to process his words. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside snapped us both to attention. Henry's eyes widened with fear. "They're here," he whispered. We scrambled up the stairs, Henry leading me to a back door. We slipped out into the night, the cool air hitting our faces as we ran. Behind us, I heard the front door being kicked in and muffled voices shouting. They were searching for us. Henry led me through a maze of back alleys and overgrown paths, his knowledge of the town's hidden routes our only advantage. We finally stopped to catch our breath in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The place smelled of rust and decay, but it was shelter. "Why are they after you?" I asked between gasps. "Because I was close to exposing them," Henry replied. "The hidden hand doesn't just manipulate events, they create them. Wars, economic crashes, even pandemics, all orchestrated to keep the world in a state of fear and control." "Why not go to the authorities?" "Who do you think controls the authorities?" Henry retorted. "They have agents everywhere. Trust no one." The gravity of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a conspiracy theory. Henry had stumbled onto something real, something dangerous. And now I was caught in the web. For days we stayed on the move, never sleeping in the same place twice. Every shadow felt like a threat, every stranger a potential enemy. Henry continued to explain the extent of the Hidden Hand's influence, how they recruited members through blackmail and bribery, ensuring loyalty through fear. Our luck ran out one night when we were cornered in a deserted factory. There was nowhere to run. Men in dark suits approached, their faces hidden behind masks. Henry clutched the folder to his chest, defiant to the end. "Give it up, Henry," one of them said. "You can't win." "Maybe not," Henry replied, "but the truth will get out." With a swift motion, he handed me the folder. "Run," he shouted. I hesitated, but Henry pushed me. "Go! Expose them!" I took the folder and bolted, hearing Henry's shouts behind me as they subdued him. I didn't look back. Now, as I write this from a hidden location, I know they are looking for me, but the world needs to know about the Hidden Hand. I'll keep running, keep hiding, until I find someone who can help me reveal the truth, because if they control everything, then nothing is safe, and everyone is at risk. The Hidden Hand is real, and they are always watching.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.